In January of 1848, this guy that you see on the screen, he woke up like he did every other day. There was nothing special. There was no divine writing in the sky. There was no angelic chorus that was outside singing his name and grabbing his attention. This was just a regular guy leading a group of men on the American River building a sawmill. In the middle of this ordinary day that turned out to be an extraordinary day, while he's working, he looks down and notices that something from the sun has glistened and shined with something on the ground. And so he reached down into that dirt, looked into his hands, and he figured out that he has just discovered gold nuggets of the highest quality. And so he began to pick it up like it was snow. He put it in his pockets. He put it in his pack. And this guy, James Marshall, ended up becoming one of the wealthiest people in America. But what's so neat about James Marshall and this discovery that he made on an ordinary day turned extraordinary day is this discovery not only blessed him and his life, but this discovery ended up blessing thousands of people. See, when word got out that he found gold, it got to the East Coast, and it ended up opening the door for the greatest and largest migration in U.S. history, what we know of as the California Gold Rush. One day can make all the difference in the world. Think biblically about that for a second. You got a guy like Moses that was out tending to his father-in-law's field, and while he's going about his ordinary day, turns out that God had a big plan for him. And in that ordinary day, this bush started talking to him and said, Moses, you're going to be the one to go to Pharaoh's courts and to get my people out of there and to let them be free. But then think about David, as we talked about this morning. This guy was out in the field. He was throwing rocks at stuff, writing songs no one's ever heard of. Then before the sun goes down, he finds out that he is eventually going to one day be king. Or think about those group of men that were fishing. They were doing their regular job that they always do. Then Jesus walks up to them and gives them the greatest call you could ever be a part of, to go out and be a fisher of men. Defining moments happen all the time. And maybe we would look for them more if we start to see that there is no such thing for a child of God as an ordinary day. There's divine appointments, there's divine opportunities that you and I are presented with every moment of every day. And these defining moments are kind of like landmarks along life's journey. You know, well, how do I know what to look for when those happen? I'll tell you when. It's kind of when those moments when God's world touches your world. And when he does, he gives you these daily decisions to choose for him or to choose against him. And one thing that I know is regardless of the choice that you choose to make in that moment, your life will never ever be the same. Esther, that we looked at and introduced this morning, she is about to be pushed into a position that is incredibly impactful, not just for her, but for an entire race of people. That she is confronted with a decision in the middle of her daily routine to either be quiet or to step up and do something. As we looked at in this text this morning, it's an amazing one in the fact that God's name is not mentioned anywhere. And that's exactly why I love it for you and I love it for me. Because like we mentioned this morning, all of us or most of us are in situations daily where God's name is not mentioned. You go to schools where God's name is not mentioned. You work in jobs where God's name is not consulted before they make some decision, but just because he's silent, that doesn't mean that God is absent. But he's not absent from Esther's story, and he's not absent from your story either. He's working behind the scenes, but here's what he's going to do, as we're going to see tonight. He's wanting to see if you're going to take advantage of these ordinary, turns out extraordinary moments. I shared this with you 2 years ago that maybe some of you remember this app. It's called the Aging Booth app. And a lot of you don't probably know what this is. This is more something for your parents. This was a good way for them to give their information to people in China. But this app, what it did was it would take your picture and fast forward to see what you're going to be. And how about that transformation, by the way, of James Marshall? Going from that to a guy that's evidently eaten a lot of food And so James Marshall made this incredible transition. We want to know, like, how am I going to know what I'm going to become one day? Like, I want to, like, achieve something great. I want to have this great calling that God has pushed me towards, and I wonder what that's going to be. And we speak of the future a lot of times like it's mysterious. It's not. That if we want to know one day what it is that we're going to be, one day what it is that we're becoming, I'll go ahead and tell you, what are you doing right now? That future you is just an exaggerated version of current you. Like, you've probably heard the statement before, well, you date who you marry. That is or whoever you date is who you're going to marry. That's a true statement. You want to tell me what your future is going to look like? I'll tell you how you can find that out. Who are your 5 closest friends? That's the trajectory of where your life is going to go. Again, it's not that mysterious. If you are a mean person, a rude person, guess what's going to happen as you grow older? You're just going to become an even more rude, an even more mean person. It boomerangs back to you. Do you like right now what you're doing? Because that's what you're going to become. An exaggerated version of that. And so for Esther, she is in the middle of what is an ordinary moment for her at the palace, turns out to be an extraordinary one because of the choices she chooses to make. And so what we're going to do tonight is look at a defining moment in Esther's life that is absolutely incredible as she makes one of the bravest choices that puts her literal life on the line. And so here's what the text says. After these things, well, after what things? Esther has now become queen. And shortly after she becomes queen, what we read about in the text is Mordecai, who is her cousin, that's raising this young orphan Jewish girl in this Persian Empire, that she has become queen. And Mordecai is working outside the king's gate, doing the job that he always does. And he overhears a conversation where a group of men are planning to kill the king. And so he steps in and he lets some folks know, hey, the king, they're after him, they're trying to kill him. And I love that he doesn't keep silent. He says something, even though he doesn't agree with the king's lifestyle, he still cares about the heart of that king and still cares about him. So he says something and intervenes in that situation. And his name is written on the record book, but here's what happens. Mordecai does not get the promotion. Mordecai does not get the raise. But this evil guy that probably people love to hate, a guy named Haman, gets that promotion. He's the one that gets that raise. And maybe some of you have been in one of those positions before where you felt like you deserved that raise, but then somebody at work got that job. Or you felt like you should have made the team because you showed up at every practice and they just showed up late, and yeah, they made a few good plays, but why are they getting that? And there's moments like that I think we're always presented with, aren't we, where somebody gets the very thing that we think we deserve. And I want you to think about this for just a second, though. Mordecai, even though he didn't get what he deserved, he still went to work. I want you for a second to think about whatever it is that you're doing right now or you plan to do, and think theologically about that. And what I mean by that is this, that your identity at the end of the day is not attached to a job, but it's attached to Jesus Christ. And why that matters is this: whatever it is that you're doing right now, if you're in the band, think theologically about the band. Play that instrument for the glory of God. If you're dating, think theologically about dating. But date that girl, date that guy to bring God glory. And by the way, you understand that's the whole point of marriage, right? It's to better understand Christ and his church. You start learning that now. That self-sacrificial mindset, looking towards the needs of other people. But think about your job. Yeah, like Mordecai, you might not get that raise. You might not get that recognition. Well, the good news is you don't get your title from a crowd. As we talked about, that a person in an office does not determine the outcome of your life. And that's great news. But think about the job it is that you have. Maybe some of you right now, you babysit. Change those diapers for the glory of God. Some of you flip hamburgers. Flip hamburgers for the glory of God, because what it is that you do is not nearly as important as who it is that you work for, which is Jesus Christ. And that's what I love about Mordecai. He understood at the end of the day, this is a job, but my job more than anything is connected to my identity, which is Jesus Christ. And so after these things, King Ahasuerus didn't promote Mordecai. He promoted Haman and advanced him and set him his throne above all the officials who were with him, and the king's servants and who were with him at the king's gate, they started bowing down to Haman, paid him homage, for the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai, what did he not do? It says he did not bow or pay homage. Now, remember this morning when we talked about anger, that it's not a sin to be angry, it's a natural biochemical response. And whenever you are angry about something, you have this place in your brain between what you feel, what you experience, the pain, by the way, that is real, the hurt that is real, that between that and your actions, there's this little space in your brain. And I've told you, for me, I have to pray over that space all the time. And for Haman, there's something he doesn't like. And so what he chooses to do, it says this, that when Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage, Haman was filled with fury, but he disdained to lay hands on him. He's thinking, I want to lay hands on this guy, but I'm not. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy all the Jews. This is the classic case of what you call overreaction. And that's why I'm talking about pray for that space. And the reason why it's so important to do that and really think about that and be not, and again, emotions are not the enemy, but there is a difference between being emotion-led and spirit-led. And so what happens in this place and time, whenever there is that thing that frustrates you, or that thing is that makes you angry, that if you're not careful, you can make, just like he's trying to make, a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion. And so what happens for him, he doesn't have control over that area because he's in control over it. And so what ends up happening, he comes up with this crazy decree, well, let's just kill all the Jews because this one guy doesn't bow down to me. And that's why I want to bring up this, is we're talking tonight about defining moments. And what you'll see, if you haven't noticed it already, and if you haven't noticed it already, you might not be looking, is that a lot of defining moments happen with the rise of evil. And the reason why I want to point this out is kind of what we talked about this morning, is that whenever we think about how we are going to be used by God, sometimes we'll say, well, it's just because this circumstance is not the best. I just can't do it. And so what we're doing, we're trying to interpret our God through the circumstances instead of trying to interpret our circumstances through God. And because of that, we're seeing things in the wrong order, in the wrong direction. And maybe it's because we have a wrong view of what comfort is. I think what we've done, and I know I've done this, I put comfort over here, and that's Jesus. And anything that's conflict or difficult is Satan. And don't get me wrong, Jesus did in fact come to this earth to comfort. But you know what he also came to do? He didn't just come to this earth to comfort. He also came to this earth to confront things that hold human beings in captivity. And when he chooses to do that, and when that is his mission, which it is, that is conflict. That sometimes it's making a difficult choice. That does show up in the form of hardship. And so I'll go ahead and tell you, Satan, what he wants you to think is this: hey, stay comfortable. Andrew, please just stay comfortable. Hey, stay comfortable. It'd be a lot easier if you just stayed comfortable. But the problem is not that God is against comfort. He is the God of all comfort, the Bible says. But sometimes growth and comfort don't go together. And so I want you to think about this. What is that one thing that makes you angry? That one sin that just frustrates the stew out of you? Whatever it is that frustrates you, makes you angry, that you see out in the world, let that be for you an invitation to act. That whatever confuses you, whatever conflict you see, think of confusion as navigation. That God is saying, hey, maybe that's exactly what you need to do. Let me give you an example of this. This past year, and I'm just trying to think current events. This past year, what was one of the most talked about things? Well, it was Roe v. Wade, right? That getting overturned. And Christians and many people celebrated this law getting overturned. And that's great and all. However, what we also have to do, we have to make sure that our ministry matches our celebration. That the thing that does maybe make you miserable, that brings you ministry also feeds your ministry. And the reason why I point that out is I'm on the board of an adoption agency in Montgomery. And right after our last meeting, we got some statistics of how things have changed in America since Roe v. Wade has gotten overturned. In just a few weeks, our director sent us that the need for adoption and parents making birth plans, the need for foster care, has gone up 120%. And for our agency alone, this is not all agencies, but for our agency, the average age of birth mothers have gone down from 25 to 16. What I'm saying is there's a lot of people, like I talked about this morning, like Mary. There's young people that are hurting. And I'm not saying that that's what everybody needs to do. Not everybody's called to adopt. James does say we're called to do something. And so maybe for you, your heart is for young people. Let that feed your ministry. You're not too young to go teach in a Bible class. In fact, I think it is very good that you do. For some of you, it might hurt your heart to see somebody that is dealing with a clean water crisis. It might hurt you to see someone that is starving for food. Well, let that feed what you choose to do. And like I said, whatever it is that you choose, it's going to oftentimes be the opposite sometimes of comfort. It doesn't always look easy. It doesn't always appear that way. But so this is what the text says. It says, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes. Well, what he's talking about here is he tears his clothes, he rips his clothes because he finds out that there's this decree, this law that is being signed that the Jewish people are about to be eliminated. It's mass genocide. And so during this day, when your heart breaks for something, you rip your clothes. And when your heart breaks for something, you put on sackcloth. But it says he went out in the midst of the city, he cried out loud in a bitter cry. And he went up to the king's gate, but no one is allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And by the way, isn't it awesome to know that we serve a God that we can approach the king's gate in sackcloth? That we can serve a God that we talked about this morning, that he prepares a table in the presence of who? Our enemies. So it says when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, hey, listen, Mordecai is outside the king's gate, and you know he's not allowed to be in the king's gate with sackcloth on and ashes. And so here's what she does. She sends garments of clothing to Mordecai so he can take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Have you ever received, and you don't have to raise your hand, just think about it hypothetically, have you ever received from somebody else false comfort? And what I mean by that is that they give you what they think you need. But you're like, well, that doesn't really, like you're treating like for him, the clothing, well, that's great. The clothing is the symptom. But my heart is for the people. Yeah, I can put on a whole new outfit because that's what you want me to have. But the issue is I don't need like a new outfit. I need a new start here. I need a connection with my heart and where my mind's really going. I don't need a new outfit. And I think sometimes we might do this to missionaries on other parts of the world, like, hey, you in Africa, worship and do this and organize this. And like, we want you to over here. Like, wait, have you been over here? That oftentimes we want other people to be what we want them to be. And we have to be careful to know that people don't need a new opinion. They oftentimes just need a brand new start. And think about Lazarus for just a second. I think about this with him and his clothing, that they unwrapped him and gave him new clothes after he was raised from the dead. That we can't expect people in our communities that don't know God or have a relationship with him to dress like a living person when they haven't first been raised from the dead. I guess what I'm saying is this. Let's first start with, instead of, hey, stop that sin, what if we started with, hey, God loves you and he can forgive that sin? We work on the heart, and then the clothes, I guess, we're going to follow. And so Mordecai was like, okay, you're missing it. That's not really what we need here. He gave a copy of this written decree in Susa for their destructions, basically said, hey, you need to see this on paper, Esther. And so he wanted to show this to her, to explain to her and say, go into the king's quarters and beg for favor from the people and plead with him on behalf of the people. So he's saying, listen, you need to go to the king's court and say, hey, they're going to wipe away the Jewish race. And for her, she's like, well, I can't just do that. You don't go into the king's court unless someone invites you. Her life is on the line. And when you try to connect with this story like I do, I understand that a lot of you are never going to be in positions in your life where what is going to be asked of you or what you're going to be called to do is going to be your life on the line. You're not. But you are going to have other choices every single day to choose maybe the hard right over the easy wrong. For some of you, it's going to be what we talked about this morning, that person that is sitting by themselves and not just not being the one that bullies, but stepping up and saying something, living with your head on a swivel, looking to give people grace and give people love. And so even though she's like, listen, I don't think I can go in there. Like, you don't understand. I mean, my life is on the line. This is what he says. And this is the verse, by the way, that people love. They put it on everything at Hobby Lobby. It says this: do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape more than any of the other Jews. And here's where it comes from. For if you keep silent at this time, relief, deliverance, that will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether or not you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. You wonder sometimes why you are where you are. We talked about those aren't coincidences. Those are God's purposes. He has you where he has you for a reason. He's like, that's what I want you to see. I want to tell you for just a second, you and I all need a Mordecai in our life. I call them crown bestowers. People that are oftentimes older than you that will see something in you that nobody maybe else sees. That says, hey, I see that you can do this. I understand that there's something, yes, that's difficult, but this is something that God can use you to do. And never underestimate, by the way, the power of your words, too, to encourage someone in their calling. In fact, I was trying to think about how to make this as practical for you. Think about it like this. If you think something good about somebody, here's what I want to challenge you to do. Say it. If you think something good about another person, say it. I can't tell you how many times I have come home and Lorianne has taught our kids during the day. She's worked on laundry. She's kept them from fighting with each other. There's all these things that she's done. And in my mind, I'm like, man, I don't know how she did it. But man, she's a good mama. Man, she's a good wife. Let me tell you, I think so many great things about my wife, but I have to tell you, I don't let those words fly. If you think something good about somebody, what? Say it. But on the flip side, I want to encourage you to do this, that if you can't say something helpful, skip it. You never know how the right word at the right time can help somebody. That's what he's trying to say. Listen, you've been put here for this time, and I see something in you. Go. But notice in this text, he says, well, here's the thing. If you don't do it, deliverance is going to rise from another place. And when I read this, I think, well, I don't want that for me. And you shouldn't want that for you. You should never want somebody to do what God has put you on this earth to do. He's like, okay, yeah, if you don't say something, I'm going to get another guy to do it. And if you don't say something, I'm going to get another girl to do it. But why would you want somebody else to do what I have uniquely placed you to do? And so for that is a few things. Number one, if we love to talk about calling, it's an exciting thing to figure out and to search for what it is that we're going to do. Well, I'll often tell you, it's what we talked about today. You do have to leave your comfort. Satan is going to try to convince you to stay comfortable. God is oftentimes like, hey, listen, you're going to have to leave what is familiar to walk in faith. You're going to have to leave that comfort to step into that calling, that the two of those don't always go hand in hand. And you've probably seen this even in your life before, that while the pain that you went through, you did not enjoy, and you would never ask for and you never want, you will also see how God packages sometimes your pain in the form of preparation, doesn't he? Like, I don't like the pain of a discipline, but I love where the pain of a discipline can lead me. And that's what we're talking about here. Yes, it's difficult, but think about what could be next. And here's the second thing, is to take a God-honoring risk. That for her, there was so much on the line, which was her life, but also what was on the line, the entire race of Jewish people. To take this God-honoring risk, what does that look like for you? Well, I think what we've done is we've divided our options in this world into two categories. There's, all right, well, either I'm going to stay here and just be safe, or I'm going to take a God-honoring risk over here. We divided the world into safety or risk. There is no such thing as safety or risk. You're either going to experience risk with God, or you're going to experience risk without God. Everything's a risk. Like, think about it. Choose your hard. Marriage is hard. Being single is hard. Marriage is hard. Being divorced is hard. Having a job is hard. Having no job is hard. Having money is hard. Having no money is hard, yes, but also being financially responsible is hard. Choose your difficult. Choose your hard. There's always a risk involved in something. It's not a choice between safety and risk. It's a choice between a risk with God or a risk without God. I guess what I'm saying is pick your risk. Choose the difficult with God or choose the difficult without Him. I love the group of friends that are described of in the Gospel of Mark when they find out that Jesus is at this house. And on the way to the house, these four friends, which you need to get you some of these, that they walk by their friend, they're like, wait, he's lame, and we're going to the guy that can heal him. And so they all get on, each corner of the mat and pick him up and begin to walk to the house where Jesus is. And I love the fact that they have this sense of urgency when they get to the door. They show up at the door, and when they do, they're standing room only. It's what everybody wants at their congregations. It's what we want at every single event, right? They get to the door, and it's slam-packed. They can't get in, and so they turn to their friend like, man, buddy, I am so sorry. Better luck next time, right? No. They're thinking, all right, what are we going to do? I know what we're going to do. We're going to climb up to the top of this guy's house. We're going to get a pitchfork, and we're going to put a hole in this man's roof. Now, if you're in the house and you're trying to lower your friend down to Jesus, guess who's probably going to have the best seat in the house? The owner of the house. And so he's sitting there right across from Jesus, and all of a sudden some rubble starts to fall down, and he sees the hind end of a man start to lower. And you're like, what are you doing? And they yelled out, we just have to get our friend to Jesus. Do you have that mentality? Are you willing to take some kind of risk? But I also think about this. I was talking with one of the Faulkner reps about this earlier, and she mentioned one of the things that she loves so much about this generation and your age group is this, that one of the things that you care about more than anything after high school is that you want to do something that makes a difference for people. And I absolutely love that from you, and I love that for you. And what it's going to take, wherever God places you, is you're going to have to be just like these four friends and come up with some hole-in-the-roof ideas. Are you okay with taking a risk? You should be. And let me go ahead and tell you, when you take that God-honoring risk, there is going to be failure, but there also is going to be successes. Take a God-honoring risk. So it says this, that Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, here's what I want you to do. I want you to gather all the Jews that are found in Susa. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to hold a fast, and to hold it on my behalf, and not eat or drink for 3 days and nights. I and my young women are also going to fast. And then I'll go to the king, though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. See, defining moments not only oftentimes show up in the middle of a very evil situation, but defining moments in your life also open up the door for the opportunity to pray and to fast. When you go out through the Bible from the very beginning to the end, one of the things that you'll notice is that anytime somebody has a life-changing decision that they have to make, have you noticed what always happens? There's prayer and there's fasting. Now, one of those we talk about more than we do the other one, and of course we know which one that is. That's fasting. But I think about this, before Jesus began his ministry, what did he do? Well, he prayed and he fasted. And fasting is more difficult than we made it to be, but often sometimes we make it more simple than it really is. But it's taking whatever it is that is a hunger for you and replacing that with dependence upon God. Why does that help you in a decision? Why does that help when you're trying to decide what college you want to go to? Why does it help when you're trying to figure out which job to take? Why does it help when you're trying to pray about somebody in your family that's sick? Because anytime you think about that food, the idea is to replace that with prayer. And so that becomes your nourishment, but it doesn't have to be food. It can be your phone. That if you find that your impulse reaction, like you get up in the morning, the very first thing you do, you get out your phone, and before you find out what God has to say about you, you want to see what the world has to say about you, you look at that phone and you see what they have to say, and you've noticed that this has become somewhat of a dependence for you. And so what you do is instead of looking at that, you spend that time in prayer. Do you see what you're doing? You're just shifting your focus in these everyday moments to make a big decision and a big change in your life. That's what fasting is all about. And I was thinking about this. This is pretty incredible because she's a young lady still. Most people believe at this point she might be in the 20 to 22 age group. That she finds out that there's going to be a mass genocide, and what her first reaction is, we need to fast. What makes us make that our first decision? Because I don't know about you guys, whenever I'm faced with a big decision, there's a moment of pressure, I'm like, all right, I'm going to grit my teeth and work harder. I'm going to try to do what I can to make things better. Here she's like, you know what? We need this in God's hands. What gave her the wisdom to do this? I'll go ahead and tell you, I don't think for Esther the crisis created this discipline. I think this crisis helped reveal what was going on with Esther from the very beginning. Here's what I mean. We don't have proof of this, but I really do believe it, because I don't think what gets someone to say, hey, let's fast and let's pray is because they haven't done it before. I think what happened with Esther is that the discipline she developed in her prayer closet is what opened up for the courage she's going to experience in the king's courts. What I'm saying is what you choose to do in private, in your relationship with God, nurturing it, developing it, it's what you can bring into the streets. That what you're going through in private and what you're dealing with and bringing before God on a regular basis is what you're going to help bring into the halls of your school. And in what you choose to be in private when no one's looking and no one can see is what you're going to bring to the corner of that office that you work at. What you do here has so much to do with what happens there. That's why I think for Esther, this crisis didn't create a discipline, but it revealed for her what was there from the very beginning. And so the second thing is this, is I love the fact in this text that God uses a Mordecai. Mordecais are the kind of people that you think God uses. They don't have like really any crazy things that happen to them. They don't have like some amazing story about how they came to God. The depth of their sin is they didn't recycle. You know, they're those kind of people. But then Esther's, these are the ones that they didn't choose what happened to them. They've gone through a very difficult situation. They're not somebody that you would have picked, because she was living in a day and a time and a place where she would have been overlooked. She would have been forgotten about. She was seen as an object, but yet she is the one that carries on the messianic line of Jesus Christ. God can use the ones that have the great title, but he also can use the ones that we oftentimes skip over. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter what your job is. At the end of the day, God needs your availability more than he does the abilities that you have. That's what he needs, is just vessels. He goes and gets the victory. Just be that vessel. But I want you to think about this for just a second. Look at and think about where Esther's influence was. She didn't have to go to the temple to have influence. She used the palace. Your school, think of that as your palace. Where you work, think of that as your palace. For college students, think of that college campus as your palace. What I love about Esther is she did not see the palace as an opportunity for self-promotion. She leveraged her position in the palace not for self-promotion, but she leveraged it for the kingdom. Do you see your school as the opportunity for you to make a name for yourself? Do you see your job as a place to make a name for you? To leverage your name, to leverage your image? Esther didn't. She became great because she was willing to give up the palace. You and I are going to become great because we make a choice to not want to be seen as even great. One of the things that's really interesting, by the way, is that Esther was only called queen once before she walks into the king's court and makes the courage within her shine through when she says, hey, they're wanting to kill all the people and Haman's behind this. But did you know she's called queen 13 out of the 14 times after she goes into the king's court? When do people see her as a queen? When she leveraged the place where she was, not for her glory, but for God's. We talked about it today. This is good news because God can do something spiritual through a secular king. His hands aren't tied, right? He can do something through a Christian president just like he can do something through a pagan dictator. His hands are never tied by the character of some person that is in an office. But the other thing that I love about her is she did not let the position she had cause her to lose compassion for other people. That's part of the difficulty of when you get maybe what you've wanted, right? When you get that opportunity, when you get that recognition, sometimes you can forget folks. You start to think of yourself a little bit better than you are. Esther did not do that. We have to always be careful when we even reach other people to not divide the world into two groups of people, those that help and those that need help. We are both. I'm no better than you, and you're no better than me. We all sin just in different ways. You go out in the community, you meet people wherever it is that you have a heart for, and you serve the people that you have a heart for. And what you're going to find is they're not, and you need to see that they're not projects to help. They are people to love. They are people just like you and I, just sin different in different ways. And Esther never let her position still for compassion. You know, one of the things we introduced this whole topic with is that God is behind the scene. So maybe for tonight, what you've been doing is living as if that's not reality. Maybe for some of you, you're going about your life thinking that everything revolves around you. Some of you might remember when you were in elementary school, I think this might have been 5th or 6th grade, we learned about a guy named Nicholas Copernicus. Do y'all remember him? Well, he was this guy that believed that the sun was the center of the universe and the solar system. But there was a belief for many years that the earth was the center of the solar system. And so people thought that Nicholas Copernicus was absolutely insane. This guy thinks that, you know, the sun is the center of the universe. I mean, is he looking around? Because when we get our telescopes out, we look out and we see everything revolving around us. Well, they started to study and realize, oh, this guy's not crazy. He makes complete sense. The earth, even though it feels like things revolve around you, and from your viewpoint, it seems like everything turns and revolves around you, the reality is the earth does not have the gravity to hold everything together, but the sun does. Yet where you're standing, it might feel like the world revolves around you. Here's what I want you to know, it doesn't. And the reason why it doesn't is you do not, and I do not have the gravity to hold everything together in my life. But Jesus Christ, the Son, does. Or maybe for some of you what it is you've been presented with a lot of moments. And in those moments, instead of taking a risk, you've bought into the lie that, well, I'm just going to choose what's safe. There is no such thing as safe. I don't know if y'all know the odds. 100 out of 100 people, they die. Okay? There's either risk with God or risk without God. Everybody dies. So choose your risk. Choose your difficulty. It's going to be with Him or without Him. Or maybe for some of you, you've never even made the decision to put on Christ in baptism. You know, we talked about tonight that we can't be in the operating center and expect to have success. That little place in your brain between what you feel and what you experience and what you choose to say and what you choose to do, those emotions, if they are leading the way, it is going to be dangerous. That's why you have to be Spirit-led. Acts 2:38 says, repent and be baptized. And when you are, you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. That is God in the operating center of your life. You cannot be what God has called you to be on your own, because you and I do not have the gravity to hold stuff together.